So yeah, I was just gonna kind of talk really briefly about a number of the things I've been doing recently.
Yeah, sure.
So just for some background context, my group has 7 PhD students in it now, and they all work on somewhat different things, mostly on AI safety, but not any one particular topic. So it's a pretty broad and diverse set of things that I'm working on. Recently, I've been trying to do more work related to governance. So I've sorted my scholar by year, so you can see some of the most recent ones if you do that as well. And maybe roughly half of the papers from 2004 are relating to governance. So this conference I was just at in Rio, fact, we had a paper called Black Box Access is Insufficient for Rigorous AI Audits. So AI auditing is something that has been increasingly popular, and governments are starting to look pretty serious about doing some serious auditing. Um, but unfortunately, so far, all of the auditing that is being done or proposed is almost all just what we call black box access. So this is like, here's a model that we're going to deploy, and you get to interact with it some before it actually gets deployed. The auditor gets to interact with it some. And in this paper, we argue that that's really not sufficient, and we would like to enable more access. Like white box access would mean that the auditor gets full access to the model weights. But we also talk about things in between that might be useful, and we also talk about ways that you could sort of simulate white box access using um, like cryptographic techniques and stuff like this to allow an auditor to make particular queries, which could be arbitrary queries, the same way that you could if you actually had, the model there, like as a PyTorch model or something, let's say, but without giving the auditor direct access to the model, so that queries can still be vetted to see if they are, legitimate, or they can be contested if the company is like, no, that's going to give you too much information about our system, for instance. Um, so yeah, the next one here, visibility into AI agents, is sort of part of a series of papers. So we had another paper at FACT last year, also led by Alan Chan, on harms from increasingly agentic algorithmic systems. So a lot of the concerns about AI systems are to do with particularly agentic systems. And here Alan is really focused on agent governance these days. So right now, we don't really see like AI agents, or especially LLM agents, being deployed much in practice, but there's a huge amount of work trying to make those systems and deploy them. And I think there's many more safety concerns become more serious and severe when you have more agentic systems. And so the paper from last year was sort of articulating and explaining why that would be the case. Um, I guess, yeah, moving down a bit. So we also have some work recently that's more technical, but is still quite related to questions of governance and auditing. So that would include the stress testing capability elicitation. What mechanisms does knowledge distillation distill? An earlier paper from 2023, which I think you'd have to click the show more for it to show up, mechanistic mode connectivity. So we're kind of also doing some work on what like how does fine tuning work, and how do current safety methods work, and why are they insufficient, and why they might be best viewed as hiding safety problems rather than fixing those problems. And that's one of the main reasons why black box audits might be insufficient, is because the auditor might fail to identify and surface the problematic behavior, and it can be much easier to figure out what's wrong with the model if you have more access, like access to the weights, or maybe access to the training process or the training data as well. Um, I guess if I now were to sort it by the citation count, there's a lot of my sort of old work from during my PhD and master's, just sort of generic deep learning stuff. Um, but some of the more recent ones here include defining and characterizing reward gaming, and goal misgeneralization and deep reinforcement learning. So those are both from 2 years ago. Um, and these are a couple papers where we tried to really introduce to the machine learning community two of these classic failure modes that, again, are sort of particularly acute or concerning when thinking about agentic AI systems. So these are ways that you can end up with a misaligned system and a misaligned agent in particular, I should say. And yeah, so just really briefly, reward hacking is basically when you have the wrong reward function and then you optimize it and something bad happens. You actually make things worse by optimizing it. And in that paper, we wanted to see what are the conditions that a reward function needs to satisfy in order to be unhackable so that it's safe to optimize. You know that optimizing that reward function won't actually make things worse. So in practice, we train models with reward models, which are imperfect approximations of what we actually care about. And so we want to know how good the approximation needs to be in order for this to be guaranteed safe. And it turns out the requirements are like extremely strict. Basically, you need to have the correct reward function, or else there's always some chance that optimizing against a proxy will actually make things worse, according to a ground truth reward function. And then the other one, goal misgeneralization, is about if you have the right reward function, but your system misgeneralizes and instead ends up learning. Yes, that's the one right at the bottom of the screens here now. Ends up optimizing a different reward function because it was maybe really correlated with the true reward function on the training distribution. And so this is really similar to some sort of well-known problems in computer vision, like the cow on the beach problem. But this is a version of it that could be particularly severe because you can end up with a system that is competently pursuing the wrong goal, and so sort of actively working against the sort of goal that you had intended for it to pursue. Yes, that gives like a little bit of a flavor. Maybe one more thing I want to mention is from the very recent papers, again, from this year, there's two papers, affirmative safety and safety cases, that are really just saying instead of just doing audits, so I already said like black box audits are maybe not enough. I think actually even any form of auditing is really not, in my mind, sufficient in terms of governance. I think we want developers to actually be making a positive, deploying AI systems to show that they are safe and that they are going to have a positive impact. And so these papers were both kind of describing ways that you can imagine doing that. So I'll leave it at that.
Super. Thanks, David, for giving that background. Meaning, as I said in the email, just to reiterate, we will record these interactions and it will go as part of a lecture online course that we are teaching. So the first one you nicely said. You actually said about facts. One of the student actually possibly looked at your tweet or something. Said that, look, you attended FACT recently. Is there anything interesting that you picked up from attending FACT technically in terms of problems?
Yeah, I guess some of the most interesting things for me there were not really on the technical side, but again more on the governance side. So understanding what people are doing right now in terms of like legal challenges around AI systems. So I think there's a lot of concerns that systems can be biased or trained on copyright data or just harming people, being deployed irresponsibly. And so we heard from some of the people who are like really involved, on the front line, so to speak, of these legal battles. So that was really cool. Technical stuff. So I mostly, when I go to conferences these days, I mostly just talk to people a lot. So I didn't even attend too many sessions, but another sort of, and I should mention, this is only the second time I've attended this conference, so I really enjoyed it and I highly recommend it. Last year I was only there for like a day and a half as well. But I was kind of trying to get, a vibe check and figure out the pulse of like how that community is thinking about things. And so it's quite interesting because there's a lot of people who are starting to think more about AI safety, partially because that is sort of a more powerful brand these days, if you will, and partially because historically people at FACT and people from the ethics community have been more likely to sort of have a skeptical or dismissive attitude towards advances in AI, saying like these things don't really work. It's like snake oil, it's a scam. And I think more and more people are starting to say, oh, that's not really the case anymore with these systems. They actually do have important, impressive capabilities, and so we really need to start, catching up and figuring out like how they're being used and what we can do about that. So yeah, it was pretty interesting, just sort of from that point of view for me to meet a lot of people from this other community that I haven't interacted with that much. And yeah, one of the things I liked about it was, well, two of the things I liked about it was it's a much more diverse community. So not just technical researchers, but researchers from many other disciplines. And also, what was the other thing I was going to mention? Well, it skips my mind now, so
Sure.
I'll let you know if I think of it later.
Yeah, I know fact for a couple of years now, and yeah, the audience is quite diverse in terms of policy researchers. Actually, one of the speakers that we had in the summer school earlier did attend last year, actually. Okay, so now let's
Yeah.
get into more questions. So, in one of your recent tweet, you actually mentioned that LLM built by current leaders. I'm just reading it from the tweet itself. So, current leaders will lead a transformative AI in a few years. They will likely be sufficiently smart and aligned to solve any remaining AI safety problems within next 1 to 2 years. Can you throw a little bit light on it? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so important context here is that I was trying to characterize a view that I think is um, like quite common, or some variation of this view is quite common within the AI safety community these days. And there's more to it as well in the tweet thread. But
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
not my view. I mean, I think this is a possibility, but I think it's not super likely. Um, but I guess, and in fact, the point of this tweet and this tweet thread was sort of for me um, to rail against this and say I disagree with all of this, and think that it's a view that is too prominent and getting too much attention, and is misleading people in terms of how they approach the question of AI safety strategically. Um, but I think there is, it certainly starts to look possible in my mind that like we're in shooting distance of like transformative AI systems, and it could be, just a few more generations of scaling will get us to systems that are like really, really powerful. And the hope, and I think it is just a hope, and I think it's a long shot and not, at the end of this tweet thread, I say these strategies are incredibly desperate and fragile. But the hope is that the leading developers, or some of the leading developers, will be able to leverage these transformative AI capabilities, either themselves or maybe in cooperation with governments, or international organizations, to sort of solve whatever problems are remaining to prevent AI from causing an existential catastrophe. And yeah, it's a little bit unclear how that's supposed to happen. Um, but a lot of people would say there are some technical problems that remain to be solved. But at a certain point, we'll get AI research assistants, and if those research assistants are not actively working against us, so I mentioned earlier how like reward hacking or goal misgeneralization could cause AI systems to be actively working against us. Um, but if that is not the case, then maybe we can get a lot of work out of these research assistants, and it will be as if we can, do 1,000 or 1,000,000 times more AI safety or AI alignment research in a year than we normally would be able to because of that. So that's kind of the line of thought that I was commenting on and
Sure.
really critiquing. And I do think it's not like totally impossible. I think it's just not something I want us to be counting on or betting on.
Yeah.
And I think it's, when you're
Yeah.
talking about trying to solve these massive problems in this span of a year or two, I think there's just so much potential for things to go off the rails, for a variety of reasons, like political reasons, for instance, if there's competition and disagreement about like how to proceed and how to use these systems and stuff like that. And then I think there's also the question of like, are we actually going to get there in a few years, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of, so I didn't really lay out all of the problems I have with this view in the tweet,
Sure.
but a few people have asked me to, and maybe I will at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, good to know the context of the tweet. This is connected to the other question that we had, right? What is AGI according to you? When do you think it'll come? If it comes, what will it look like, and what will you do with it?
yeah, I mean, so in my mind, AGI refers to like AI systems that have no qualitative or quantitative cognitive deficits compared to humans and let's say expert humans, just to be clear. So I think the basic idea of AGI in my mind was always like AI systems that really surpass human intelligence in every sense of the word. Um, and I think if and when this happens, it's going to like pretty quickly unleash a lot of chaotic power struggles and probably lead to um, yeah, the extinction of humanity or something really bad, because I think it's like going to be, even if it's technically possible to keep these systems in control, I think we will still see that people will use them to pursue selfish and short-term objectives because they'll feel that it is necessary for to maintain their own competitiveness and really to survive as a nation or an organization or a company or an individual. So I think when I look around the world today, I see a lot of this happening right now already. We're not very good at solving collective action problems and coordinating, to work towards the common good. You can see climate change is a great example of this. Um, and even things like the persistence of wars. These are just destructive conflicts that nobody really thinks are should exist necessarily, but we don't have a way of coordinating to avoid them. So I think AGI is likely to intensify and accelerate all of these competitive dynamics and lead to sort of a race to the bottom where yeah, people are just forced to uh, yeah, sort of act in their very short term and selfish interests in order to not sort of fall behind and be outcompeted. And I think that's going to be really bad for everybody and for the world.
Yeah. No, I think this power equation is definitely a important thing to keep in mind. We'll come back to this power later at some point in time. But let's get to, so Usman actually interacted with us last week. He presented the report and gave some of the open challenges. From your side, can you sort of say list down high level takeaways from the report? I'm also curious to hear about how did the report idea get conceived? What process procedure did you follow in actually putting this report together? Why was it exciting to write this report?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So basically, this report was Usman's idea, and really, like, so much of the credit goes to him. So I have to make that clear. If it certainly wouldn't have happened without him, and he did the much more work than anybody else, myself included. And originally, he started talking to me about this about a year ago, and saying we should make like a concrete problems in AI safety for the LLM era. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with this classic paper from 2016, Concrete Problems in AI Safety.
Yeah, yeah.
But to some extent, it's kind of outdated because so much has changed with the advent of LLMs. I consider it a new paradigm along the lines of how deep learning was a new paradigm when I got into the field about 11 years ago. And so I think everything needs to be revisited in light of LLMs and foundation models. And it just kind of got bigger and bigger in scope, and one thing led to another. So we ended up with a 175-page document instead of like a 25-page document as we had originally envisioned. Um, and yeah, what else to say about that? I mean, I
So,
think I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, despite it drifting so far from the vision. And it did take a long time to finish, just because there was a lot of work to do, corralling and organizing this large project with so many people, and then trying to maintain like a consistent editorial style and standard of quality, and just getting people sort of on the same page about what we were trying to do, like really making it a research agenda instead of something more like a survey or review paper. Um, in terms of the big takeaways, I mean, I think to a large extent it was more in my mind about sort of expressing things that were already, in our heads, me and Usman, about like, what we think are the interesting problems. I guess I think Usman told me that he updated some towards some of the directions that are really popular in the AI safety community being much less promising. So interpretability being one of the main ones that's incredibly popular in the AI safety community, but really doesn't look very promising to either of us. So I think it's sort of a good thing to work on, but it's really overinvested compared to some of the other problems we talk about are very neglected. Um, One of the sections that, or I guess two of the sections that I proposed and contributed the most to were about safety performance trade-offs. So that gets back to the previous question. And the basic idea there is like, uh, if there is a trade-off between safety and performance, then there will always be pressure for people to sacrifice safety in order to have a more performance system. And that's one way that you can get these really problematic sort of game theory dynamics where people deliberately build and deploy and use systems that they know are not safe and they know might even, go rogue and get completely out of control, because not doing so is just not competitive. So if we think about AI agents again, one of the key properties of an agent is that you give it a ton of autonomy. And so you could say, like, just run this company for me. So one of the things I'm very worried about is I think once we get to AGI, it will be very hard to keep humans in the loop in any meaningful sense. And there'll be a huge pressure for organizations to just automate all decision making. And compare that to where an AI can make, tons of decisions like really quickly with like actually having meetings and having conversations and, making decisions on the on the time span of days instead of like seconds. And it's easy to see why it would be really hard to compete if you don't hand off decision making to an AI system. So that was one really interesting one. Another one was section 2.2, which I forget what we call it, but it's basically about the notion of capabilities in AI systems. So all of this stuff about auditing or evaluations is sort of predicated on the notion of systems capabilities, and particularly the idea of dangerous capabilities. So the current, sort of international governmental consensus seems to be we certainly don't want there to be easily available AI systems that can help you build weapons of mass destruction. So let's call that a dangerous capability, and then let's try and make sure that we have a proper evaluations regime such that any system that's going to be made available to people won't help them build weapons of mass destruction. I think this is a very like kind of weird and limited way of viewing the problem of AI safety, but let's just go with it for now. So that's where people are at in terms of policy. But this whole notion of capabilities is a little bit confused. And it's a word that I think people really started using a lot more like 2 years ago, along with evals. And these both kind of come out of the safety community, and neither of them has much rigorous grounding. And so there's a question of like, what does it even mean that a system has a capability? So you can talk about the performance on a benchmark, but we know that benchmarks don't always really reflect underlying capabilities because they can be very narrow. And if you look at performance on even a slightly different distribution, you can find that the system performs much differently and much worse. So this idea of just measuring capabilities in terms of performance on a benchmark isn't really satisfying. And so we sort of talk about how could we go beyond this and have a more rigorous way of talking about capabilities, because they are such a big part of the conversation right now, and it's really not technically grounded in a very rigorous way.
Yeah, sure. So one follow-up question is, meaning, what was the sort of the idea in putting the authors together? Meaning, they're from all across the world, including Dan's group on one side, right? So how did that happen?
Yeah. So I think we basically just started thinking about who we knew who worked on these different areas that we wanted to cover, and then reached out to people. And in some cases, I think we like would contact somebody more senior and ask them to help recruit junior people. So we sort of tried to have a senior author who would sort of be have like editorial control, and then more junior authors like actually writing the content. And
Sure.
then besides that, we also then had like Usman rewriting stuff a lot of times, and me sort of exercising the final editorial control, or me and Usman collaboratively doing that. And one thing that we were aiming for is to really like have primarily or exclusively academic authors. So, there's sort of a meta issue with the whole field of AI and AI safety in particular, where a lot of it is happening in companies, and these are the companies that are building the dangerous AI systems. And so there's kind of a conflict of interest there. And A lot of the
That's
times,
interesting.
concerns about AI safety and existential risk in particular get characterized and mischaracterized as just some sort of corporate ploy to distract from other issues or to like hype up their products. And we really wanted to make sure that we weren't, falling victim to that
Hmm.
misperception.
Interesting. You referred as dangerous AI systems. I'm curious to know what are the companies and products that you think are dangerous AI systems as of now.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of a question of like, yeah, what you mean by dangerous. I think I have another tweet about this. I mean, I think the release of GPT-4 was dangerous and irresponsible, and I think that um, there wasn't any reason a priori to be confident that the system wasn't going to lead to an existential catastrophe or cause otherwise like massive societal harms. So I think that was like a pretty unlikely risk, but the magnitude of these risks are large enough that I think ideally everyone would be moving slower and being more careful with deploying these systems. So that comes back to like the safety performance trade-offs,
Hmm.
where if you do more testing, more safety testing, or if you try and ensure that you really understand how the system works, then that's going to really limit your ability to build and deploy systems quickly. Um, and I think, so far we haven't really seen people successfully build powerful AI agents on the back of systems like GPT-4.
Hmm.
And so it's really unclear, you know, whether and to what extent these kinds of safety concerns will manifest when that happens. Um, so, um, Yeah, so I think basically any systems that are like at that capability level and above, I would consider potentially dangerous. And I think, again, depending on what you mean by dangerous, potentially dangerous is just a version of dangerous because it means you don't know if it's dangerous or not. And so you
Yeah.
should, if you're being conservative, you should treat it as dangerous. Um, so like broadly speaking, I think yeah, like my view on the whole state of AI right now is that we need like an indefinite pause on advancing AI capabilities in order to like actually get our shit together and try and coordinate to have a more effective means of uh, controlling the rate of progress and the way in which systems are deployed and used. So I think these are incredibly difficult governance problems that we don't really have any promising ideas for right now. And I worry that within a few years' time or like a decade's time, it will be pretty clear that AI is completely reshaping the world and poses a serious risk to human existence, or at least existence as we know it. And we'll be in a similar situation to where we are with climate change, or where we have been for several decades, where there's scientific consensus, but we still aren't able to coordinate effective global action on the problem. And I would like us to, buy as much time as possible to sort of start working on those global coordination issues before we get to like really powerful and dangerous systems. Um, yeah, this also relates to the thing about capabilities, where, and one of the reasons why I think audits are insufficient is that you don't really know what a system can do when you combine it with other systems. So like when you give it access to more tools and more kinds of data, and when you have like interactions of many systems. And so I think like some of the capabilities that GPT-4 exhibits are like really incredible and could be really really powerful and dangerous if people figured out how to make it into an effective agent and gave it access to more real world sensors and actuators. And I say could be because it's just we don't know. So I'm not saying it's like certainly would be a problem, but I think there's like there is some risk there already. So yeah.
Sure. So you mentioned this couple of times. So let's go deeper there. Global coordination, couple of times you mentioned. So what are your thoughts on global coordination? What is going on now? Meaning it. I mean, there's a connected question also, which is like this EU AI Act that has come. Is that so to say going to look at some of these global coordination, particularly with EU, US, India? Any thoughts on what's going on in this space of coordinating between countries?
Yeah, so like the EU Act, as to my knowledge, is just about the EU. So yeah, I think like there's been uh, these safety summits, and there's been some signs of progress here. So it does look like there's an effort, at least, to coalesce around some sort of international auditing or evaluation scheme. And that's, that does represent some meaningful progress. On the other hand, I think it's woefully inadequate, and I'm skeptical that it will be enacted effectively in a way that like has real teeth. Um, so I think a lot more is needed. What I would say is basically, I would like all of the major world governments right now to be like sitting down and talking to each other about what are we going to do if we arrive at a scenario where we know that there are certain AI systems that we don't want to exist because they're too dangerous. And so we just all agree that like this thing just shouldn't exist. We don't want anybody to have it. What can we do? Like, is there any solution that we can imagine where we would actually be able to say, that kind of system is not going to exist because we all agree that it shouldn't? And the problem again is like maybe individual nations will have reasons to cheat and build such a system anyways, for instance for autonomous warfare or for just economic competitiveness or other geopolitical reasons. And the way I usually think about this is like a very simplified picture of future AI systems, um, or maybe even like, well, yeah, of the kind of AI systems I'm worried about is like it's like a button that you can push, and every time you push it, you get $1 million, but there's a 1 in a million chance it destroys the world. We don't want anything like that to exist because everyone's going to just like push that button a bunch of times really fast, and then the world is going to end. And I think when you're talking about systems that might actually like go rogue, escape human control, and be able to take over the world essentially, um, you are running that risk. And so I think because we don't really have any way of assuring that a system won't do that now, the only reason that we aren't that worried is because the systems don't seem capable of doing it. So none of the current systems seem like quite smart enough. Like they're pretty smart, but they're not there yet. They're not at the point where like if we had them plugged into all sorts of infrastructure, and if they were running companies or running militaries or these sorts of things, they would actually be able to successfully disempower humanity. But in the future, that does seem like something that's going to happen at some point because we will have AGI and then superhuman AI systems. And it also seems like in the future, there will be lots of competitive reasons to plug these systems into exactly those things, into the military, into infrastructure, into leadership positions in companies, into supply chains, and just everywhere because they'll be so effective, so efficient, and be able to make really high quality decisions really fast. And at that point, I think we don't want to do any of that unless we really have a really good reason to believe that these systems are going to stay under human control or do things that are in humanity's interest. And I just don't see any pathway towards having that level of confidence right now. Um, so I think in my mind it's like quite likely that we will reach this situation before too long, where we see the writing on the wall. We see that this is where things are headed, and everyone you know wants to slam on the brakes and wants to stop. They don't want us to hand over all of the running of society AI systems. But at that point, it'll be really difficult to stop it. So I think we need to sort of think ahead a little bit and think about what could we do to coordinate to prevent that from happening.
Sure. Let's get to privacy for few questions. As all of us understand, these models have been trained using social media data, which may have some of our personal data, including your tweets, including my tweets. How can these AI systems be designed to respect and protect users' privacy?
Yeah, it's a really big problem in my mind. I think there there are some technical tools like differential privacy here that might be useful, but I think this is like mostly another sort of structural problem where um, there just isn't a proper incentive to protect users' privacy, and so all of the business models are not really set up to do that in the way that I would like to see. So I think it would take like a pretty significant transformation of how business is being conducted right now, because you'd really want to redesign the whole process sort of from the ground up with privacy in mind. And so there's things like the GDPR sort of gives you these rights over your personal data, but it's really hard to see how rights like that might be enforced. Sorry, so GDPR, that's another EU regulation from a few years back.
Yeah, yeah,
How
we
things like
have
that
seen that as part of the
enforced.
summer school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How things like that could be enforced in the context of AI systems. So, like, if this system was trained on your data, we don't actually have any technical means of undoing that right now. Like, there's work on it, but none of the methods are like actually very good. And so, it's not like we're going to throw away GPT-4 and train it all over again just because it used a little bit of somebody's data and they decided they didn't want that. That's just not something that I see
Yeah.
happening, although maybe it would be good if we did do that sort of thing and take these things really seriously. So, yeah, I think it's more of like a structural or societal problem at the end of the day, where we need to, yeah, find a way to like give people more power over their data and like really enforce that. But again, that would maybe cause a lot of issues for the way that AI is currently being practiced. And there are like these big powerful companies who are the ones who are building these systems and benefiting from them, and they are certainly not going to just suddenly make this kind of a change that would really be giving away a lot of their power and putting more power into the hands of the people whose data are used to train the systems. Um, yeah, so this connects to the legal challenges that I mentioned. So
Mm-hmm.
um, one of the interesting legal issues right now in the States is the notion of fair use of copyright data. So I think so far, LLM developers have successfully argued that they are allowed, and I guess foundation models more generally, or large models like I think stability and image generation models as well, that they're allowed to train on copyrighted data because their use of the data is transformative. So this is they argue that it's similar to like if you're an artist and you sort of make a collage where you like take pieces of somebody else's art or like pieces of brands and you like put them onto some new art piece in a way that is expressing something different but using bits and pieces of stuff other people have produced. And uh, to my mind, this is not a valid argument because one of the important criteria for establishing that use of copyright data falls under fair use is that you aren't directly competing with the creators of the copyright data. And so if you think about something like, translation or like generating art, it's pretty clear that these systems are directly competing with translators and artists right now. And so I think this argument is bogus, and I hope that it will be successfully challenged in court. And I think that sort of thing could give a lot more, privacy and just rights over data more generally to people producing the data, because data is so central to building these AI systems, and society really was not set up with this in mind, right? So even besides that point, there's sort of a higher level point of like data is so valuable now, and we need to actually account for that properly. So like when somebody uses your data and like uses it to build a really powerful AI system, they should not, just get away with all of the benefits and profit from doing that. You, as the person who created the data that they trained the system on, regardless of whether it was copyright, you should still, be compensated in some way, and even more than compensated, I think you should have some real power. So not just financial compensation, but power over the use of your data. But yeah, this is all like stuff that I don't know that much about, but this is just kind of my opinion
Sure.
on the high level take of like how things need to work if we want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
really take this issue and do better.
Yeah, yeah. As part of the summer school, we did see content for machine learning, catastrophic forgetting, and those ideas. So yeah, very good, very good. So you talked about these large companies. My next question was around that. Let's see if you have anything more to add here. Given Apple's collaboration with OpenAI to integrate ChatGPT into their devices, and Elon Musk's concern about data usage, is the privacy and data of users at risk if AI assistants take over and is added to all these devices also? You mentioned about AI assistants agents before, so
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is sort of the first that I heard this news specifically, but I think so far, all of the like personal and private data that exists on the web is like it's not actually, the personalization is pretty weak so far in general. And I think AI and LMs could change this in a big way in the next few years, and that has um, huge potential to cause more problems. So I think, and again, it comes back to the safety performance trade-off thing. So again, imagine in the next few years that you have big companies coming out with these AI assistants that will learn to adapt to your work habits and to customize, everything they do to be like a really good personal assistant that you would maybe pay like $100,000 a year for right now. And you can get it for like, $100 a month or something. So like way cheaper. So now there's a huge financial reason for you to adopt this system and use it. On the other hand, by learning all of this about you, learning how you work, learning your routine, learning your, how you do your job, like how you think about things, how you approach problems, all of these sort of personal and psychological factors, and even, things about your relationships, just all of these things, right, are really relevant to doing this kind of job. And if all of that knowledge is now in the hands of these big companies who are selling you these assistants, that gives them such an incredible and dangerous amount of power because they don't have to use that in your own interests, right? There's like some economic incentive to do that on the basis of competitiveness, maybe, but there's also a huge potential for misuse of that data to do things like manipulate you, sell you things, maybe manipulate your political opinions, and that's sort of arguably like the tip of the iceberg, right? So I think the idea of having one of these really incredible AI assistants is just, it sounds great, right? And I really want one. I would love that. This is one of the things that I imagined when I was first getting into the field of AI and thought would be so cool. But the way that AI is developed and sold and everything right now makes this just really sketchy. It's like really not a position I want to be in, where a big company or a government for that matter, like I don't want anybody to know that level of detail about me unless maybe an individual person who I know and have a relationship with and I trust, like a human personal assistant, maybe. But even that, that's depending on your views on privacy, not something you might want. But yeah, as this becomes very cheap and very accessible, it's going to be really hard to resist the temptation, if you will, or really the economic incentives to adopt this kind of system. But it also will, just put you in a very vulnerable position, I think. And I don't really see any way around that. Again, it's just like sort of coming out of the current way that the technology is being developed. Sorry, I shouldn't say I don't see any way around it. I mean, I think fundamental changes to how the technology is developed and deployed could address this, but that is a very big project and one that we like urgently need to start undertaking now, even if these things aren't here, present, and live.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
I was going to ask that question only. If you were to be restarting the whole, so to say, area domain of Gen AI, and if you were to design all of these well and not have these privacy issues that you're discussing, what would you do? Where would you start? How should one go about it?
Yeah, it starts to get outside of my area of expertise. So like I can give you these high level takes about like the way that it works right now is bad and scary. But how should it be different? I mean, I think I think there are ways that you could set this up where sort of we sort of it's like the company has like half of a key and I have the other half of a key. And if the two halves don't come together, nothing can get done. And also, they're sort of only put together on a case by case basis.
Hmm.
So, like when there's a particular thing that we both agree should happen, we combine forces and we make that thing happen. But I never give away like my half of the key to the company, and so you know every time that the company would want to do anything or like run any computation about me, it would sort of need that half of my key. um, and I think there's maybe still some issues and some trade-offs you'd have to make in terms of a big part of what makes these systems powerful is generalization. So like there's the personalization using my data, but the system also benefits so much from using everybody else's data, and that can help teach it how to help me. And so we want those benefits of like generalization and sort of aggregating the data in some sense into a powerful system that has, somehow informed about human preferences in general or people like me and can use that to help serve me. But I think we could find the right way to balance these trade-offs and manage them if sort of the structurally things were set up in the right way. And I think that would mean something like this, where essentially I'm like every time any of my data is used, it's used in a very like limited way, and there's sort of like accounting and tracking of it to make sure that it's not misused and stuff like that. But it's yeah, I couldn't say how this all could be
Sure, sure,
implemented. I
sure.
just believe that such a thing is possible based on my conversations with people who know more about these things than I do.
Yeah, yeah, sure.